Sometimes the hardest truths don't arrive with warnings. They knock on your door on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, carried by strangers who turn out to be anything but strange to the man you spent half a century loving. I'm here today to share something I never imagined I'd have to speak aloud, a story that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. It's about betrayal, yes, but it's also about something deeper, about how we can live alongside someone for 50 years and still not truly know them at all. My name is Constance Marshall, though everyone has always called me Connie. I'm 80 years old now, a retired bank clerk, and until 2 years ago, I would have told you I had lived a blessed life. I would have pointed to my wedding photos from 1973, to my 2 beautiful children, to the comfortable suburban home my husband Harold built for us. I would have smiled and said I was one of the lucky ones. I met Harold in 1971 at a community picnic. I was 20 years old, fresh out of secretarial school, and working my first job at First National Bank. He was 23, ambitious and charming, with strong hands roughened from construction work and dreams of running his own contracting business. He had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. When he asked me to dance that day, I felt my cheeks flush pink in a way they hadn't since I was a schoolgirl. We married 2 years later, in June of 1973. I wore my mother's lace veil, and Harold wore a suit he'd saved 3 months to buy. We honeymooned in Niagara Falls. It was all we could afford, but standing there in the mist with his arm around me, I felt like the richest woman in the world. We were young and full of plans. He would build his business. I would work at the bank until we started a family. We would grow old together in a house with a white picket fence. And we did, in a way. Harold's contracting business took off faster than either of us expected. By 1975, he had a crew of 15 men and was bidding on commercial projects across the state. Our son David was born that year, and our daughter Michelle followed in 1978. I left the bank to stay home with them, and Harold worked harder than ever to provide for us. The traveling started early. Construction work meant going where the projects were, Harold explained. Sometimes it was 3 days away, sometimes a full week. When he landed a major contract renovating a shopping complex 3 hours away in 1980, the trips became longer, 2 weeks at a time, sometimes 3. "The money's too good to pass up, Connie," he'd say, kissing my forehead before dawn departures. "I'm doing this for us, for the kids' college funds." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He called every night like clockwork around 8 o'clock. He'd tell me about stubborn contractors and weather delays, about missing my pot roast and the kids' laughter. On weekends home, he was attentive, coaching David's Little League team, helping Michelle with her science projects, taking me to dinner at the Italian place I loved. Our friends envied us. "You two are like something out of a storybook," my best friend Margaret used to say. The years rolled by in a rhythm I found comforting. The kids grew up. David went to college in 1993, Michelle in 1996. Harold's business expanded to 3 states. The separations grew longer, but so did our bank account. We bought a bigger house in 1995. We vacationed in Florida every winter. We celebrated our silver anniversary in 1998 with a party for 100 guests, renewing our vows under the same oak tree where Harold had proposed. Looking back now, I see all the signs I missed. How Harold always paid in cash for everything when he was on the road, leaving no credit card trail. How he had a P.O. box for his business mail that I never questioned. How he insisted on doing his own taxes, saying it was too complicated for me to understand. How he bought a separate cell phone in 2005 just for work calls and was oddly protective of it. But in a marriage, you choose trust. You choose to believe that the man who holds your hand in church, who sits across from you at Thanksgiving dinner, who holds your first grandchild with tears in his eyes, You choose to believe he's telling you the truth. I chose to believe for 50 years. The cancer diagnosis came in early 2022. Harold had been feeling tired, losing weight. When the doctor said stage 4 liver cancer, I felt the floor drop out from under me. But Harold squeezed my hand and said, "We've been through worse, Connie. We'll get through this too." He didn't want to worry the kids, insisted we tell them it was manageable. I should have questioned that, but I was too focused on caring for him. The treatments, the appointments, the long nights when he couldn't sleep, and we'd sit together watching old movies. In those final months, I felt closer to him than I had in years. He seemed softer, more present. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, regret maybe, or sorrow. I thought it was about the cancer. He died at home on August 14th, 2023. I was holding his hand. His last words were, "I'm sorry, Connie." I thought he was apologizing for leaving me. I kissed his forehead and told him it was okay, that I'd be fine, that he could rest now. The funeral was on a Thursday. It was beautiful in its way. The church full of flowers, friends sharing stories about Harold's generosity and humor. Our children stood beside me, keeping me upright. Grandchildren who barely understood death clutched my hands. I was numb with grief, moving through the rituals like an automaton. I noticed her during the service, a woman around 60, standing at the very back with 2 younger people. They didn't come to the burial, didn't join us at the reception afterward. I mentioned them to David, who shrugged. "Probably someone from Dad's work," he said. 2 weeks passed. I was beginning the terrible work of sorting through Harold's things, deciding what to keep and what to let go. The house felt too big, too empty. I'd catch myself setting 2 places at dinner, reaching for the phone to call him when something funny happened. Then the doorbell rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 2 o'clock. I remember because I'd just finished my lunch and was considering whether I had the energy to work in the garden. When I opened the door, the woman from the funeral stood there, but this time I could see her clearly. She had Harold's eyes, the same shade of hazel, the same slight droop at the outer corners. Behind her stood the 2 young people, and now that they were close, the resemblance hit me like a physical blow. "Mrs. Marshall?" "I'm Linda," she said. Her voice shook. We need to talk about Harold." I let them in, though every instinct screamed at me to slam the door. We sat in my living room, surrounded by 50 years of my life with Harold, our wedding photo on the mantel, vacation souvenirs from trips we'd taken, framed pictures of our grandchildren. Linda perched on the edge of the sofa, twisting her hands in her lap. The young man and woman sat on either side of her, protective. "Mrs. Marshall," Linda began, then stopped, started again. "Connie, I don't know how to say this. There's no good way. Harold and I were together for 32 years. These are our children, Thomas and Sarah. They're 33. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. It was like she was speaking a foreign language. You and Harold," I repeated slowly. "You're saying you had an affair with my husband?" "It wasn't an affair," Linda said, and I saw tears on her cheeks. At least I didn't think it was. He told me, he said you and he were married in name only, business partners, that you stayed together for the kids, but there was no love there anymore. He said he was going to divorce you, that he was just waiting for the right time. She pulled out a folder, one of those accordion files people use for important documents. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Harold and Linda at a beach. Harold and Linda at what looked like a birthday party. Harold with his arm around a pregnant Linda. Harold holding 2 newborn babies. Harold at a graduation. Harold carving a Thanksgiving turkey in a kitchen I'd never seen. 32 years of photographs. 32 years of a life I knew nothing about. The young man, Thomas, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Marshall, we're not here to cause trouble. We didn't know about you. I mean, we knew Dad was married, but he told us it was complicated, that you had your own life. We thought you knew about us. We grew up 3 hours from here," Sarah added quietly, "in Riverside. Dad would come stay with us, sometimes for weeks at a time. He had clothes in the closet, his tools in the garage. He came to our school plays, taught me to drive, helped Tom with his college applications. We thought we were his family, too." I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the photographs as Linda continued laying them out on my coffee table, like cards in a grotesque game of solitaire. Here was Harold blowing out candles at what must have been his 70th birthday, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. Here he was in a garden, younger, maybe in his 50s, his hand on Linda's shoulder. Here were the twins as children, maybe 7 or 8, with Harold between them at what looked like an amusement park. "He had liver cancer," I finally managed to say. "We know," Linda whispered. "He told us 6 months before he told you. He said he was getting treatment. We wanted to help, but he said it would be too complicated, that he needed to handle it privately. After he died, we saw the obituary. That's when we realized the funeral was for both families, but you didn't know we existed. I asked them to leave. I needed them gone, needed these strangers with Harold's eyes out of my house." Linda left her folder on the table, said I could keep it, that she had copies of everything. As they walked to the door, Thomas turned back. "Mrs. Marshall, I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I think he loved you. And her. I think he just couldn't choose, or wouldn't." After they left, I sat in the silence of my house and looked at those photographs for hours. I saw a life running parallel to mine for 32 years, overlapping, intertwining, but separate. Harold's business trips mapped perfectly onto Linda's memories of him being home. When he was with me for Christmas, he'd told her he had to travel for work. When he was with her for her birthday, he'd told me he was dealing with a difficult client. The next days were a blur of investigation. I became a detective of my own life, searching for evidence of the truth I'd been too trusting to see. I found a bank account I'd never known about. Harold had been depositing money into it monthly, then transferring it to an account in Linda's name. The records went back 30 years. I found a storage unit rented under a name I didn't recognize, Harold's mother's maiden name combined with Linda's birthday. Inside were boxes of documents, photograph albums, birthday cards the twins had made for their father. There was a whole wardrobe of clothes I'd never seen him wear, a different style than what he kept at our house. There were tools, books, even a guitar. Harold had told me he never learned to play, but here was evidence of lessons, of practice. My lawyer discovered something else, a second will, dated 3 months before Harold died. In it, he'd left a third of his estate to Linda and the twins. He'd hidden this will in that storage unit, maybe planning to have it found after his death, or maybe losing his nerve in those final weeks. I called David and Michelle and told them everything. They were devastated, furious. David wanted to sue Linda, to contest the will, to make them pay for destroying our family. But I was too tired for anger. What would we be suing for? The money Harold had already given them? The time he'd spent there? You can't sue someone for loving a man who lied to them too. 3 weeks after Linda's visit, I invited her back. Just her, not the twins. We sat in my kitchen, 2 women who'd loved the same man, who'd been betrayed by the same lies. We spent 4 hours piecing together Harold's double life, comparing stories, finding the seams where his 2 worlds had almost touched, but never quite overlapped. Linda told me about how Harold had promised, year after year, that he would leave me, how she'd believed him until the twins were in high school, when she'd finally accepted he never would. But by then, she loved him too much to leave. She'd settled for being his other family, convincing herself that half of Harold was better than none at all. I told her about growing old with a man who was apparently growing old with someone else simultaneously. about grandchildren who'd sat on Harold's knee, not knowing they had cousins 3 hours away, about 50 years of holidays and anniversaries that now felt like elaborate performances. "Did he love us?" Linda asked at one point, her voice small. "Or were we both just conveniences?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Before she left that day, I made a decision that shocked my children. I told Linda I would honor Harold's second will, that I would give her and the twins their share of the estate, not because I had to legally, but because those children didn't ask to be born into a lie. They didn't deserve to lose both their father and their financial security because of his choices. David called me foolish. Michelle accused me of being too forgiving, but I wasn't forgiving Harold. I was trying to find a way to live with what he'd done, and punishing Linda and her children wouldn't give me back the 50 years I'd lost to his deception. I never saw Linda again after that day. We had nothing left to say to each other. We'd both loved a man who'd turned love into a shell game, moving pieces around so neither of us could see the whole picture. Some truths once shared don't require further contact. The months that followed were the hardest of my life, harder than the cancer, harder than Harold's death. I had to reconstruct my entire history, examining every memory through this new, terrible lens. That time, Harold had been stuck on site during Michelle's high school graduation. He'd been at Sarah's graduation instead. The Christmas he'd had the flu and stayed in bed all day. He'd probably spent it with Linda and the twins the week before, exhausted from maintaining 2 celebrations. Every "I love you" became suspect. Every gift, every kiss, every whispered promise in the dark, were they real or just part of the performance? I'd thought I was his wife, his partner, his best friend. Now I wondered if I'd been anything more than a habit, a comfortable routine he couldn't quite give up. I stopped wearing my wedding ring 6 months after Linda's first visit. My finger felt naked without it, pale where the gold had sat for 50 years. I sold the ring and used the money to completely redecorate the house. Out went the furniture Harold and I had picked together, the curtains we'd hung, the pictures on the walls. I couldn't live in a shrine to a marriage that had been a lie. My children were worried about me. I'd stopped going to church, couldn't bear the pitying looks from people who'd toasted our 50th anniversary just months before Harold died. I'd quit the garden club, the book group, everything that reminded me of the life I'd thought I had. I was adrift, unmoored from the identity I'd built over 8 decades. Then I found the support group. It was advertised in the local paper for those dealing with infidelity and betrayal in long-term relationships. I almost didn't go. At 80 years old, I thought I was too old to start processing trauma like a therapy patient. But on a rainy Thursday evening, I found myself in a church basement with 7 other people, mostly women, mostly my age or close to it. Their stories were different from mine, but the pain was the same. A woman named Ruth had discovered her husband's affair after his death, finding love letters in his workshop. A man named George had learned his wife of 40 years had embezzled money from their business to support a boyfriend. We were all rebuilding our lives on the ruins of what we'd believed to be true. Working with that group gave me something I desperately needed, a sense that I wasn't alone, wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. They understood the particular agony of discovering betrayal after death when there's no one to demand answers from, no chance for confrontation or closure. Harold was gone, taking his reasons and his apologies with him. Now 2 years later, I can finally talk about it without my voice shaking quite so much. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, with never knowing exactly how much of my life was real and how much was theater. I've learned that you can be married to someone for 50 years and still not truly know them, that people are capable of maintaining 2 completely separate lives with a skill that would be impressive if it weren't so devastating. People ask me if I regret those 50 years with Harold. It's a complicated question. I don't regret my children. David and Michelle are wonderful people, and watching them grow up was one of my life's greatest joys. I don't regret my grandchildren or the moments of genuine happiness I know I experienced, but I regret trusting blindly when I should have questioned. I regret making myself small and convenient, never demanding more of Harold's time or attention because I didn't want to be that kind of wife. I regret wasting 50 years of loyalty on a man who was splitting himself in half, giving pieces of himself to two different women, and never being whole for either of us. The hardest part isn't even the betrayal itself, it's the revision of history it requires. Every memory is tainted now. I look at my wedding photos and wonder if he was already looking elsewhere. I remember our children's births and wonder if he was thinking about having children with Linda too, which he did, just 8 years after Michelle was born. I remember romantic dinners and wonder if he'd taken Linda to the same restaurant the week before. But I've also learned something else, something I try to share with the others in my support group who are earlier in their healing. Harold's betrayal says everything about who he was, and nothing about who I am. I was a faithful wife, a good mother, a loyal friend. I kept my vows. I loved, honestly. The fact that he didn't, that he couldn't or wouldn't, doesn't diminish the integrity with which I lived my life. Linda and I were both victims of the same man's inability to be truthful. She spent 32 years loving someone who would never fully commit to her, raising children whose father could only ever be part-time. I spent 50 years trusting someone who was lying to me every single day. We both lost years we can never get back. The only difference is that I had the legal paperwork and the public recognition, while she had the secret knowledge that she'd always be secondary. I've packed away most of Harold's things now. His clothes went to charity. His tools went to David. The photographs, both sets, mine and Linda's, went into boxes in the attic. I keep just one picture out from our wedding day, not because I cherish it anymore, but because I need to remember that young woman in the lace veil who thought she knew what her life would be. She deserved better than what she got, and I owe it to her to live the rest of my life with my eyes open. Some days are better than others. I have moments when I think about Harold and feel nothing but sadness for the life he could have had if he'd just been honest with me, with Linda, with himself. Other days I'm angry all over again, furious at his selfishness, at his cowardice, at the way he let both families mourn him like he belonged to us, when really he'd belonged to no one. I'm 80 years old now. I don't know how many years I have left, but I know I won't spend them trapped in the past, trying to decode a dead man's motivations. I've joined a painting class, something I always wanted to do but never made time for because I was too busy being the perfect wife. I've started traveling with a group of other widows, seeing places I always wanted to visit, but Harold said were too touristy or not worth the money. I'm building a life that's just mine, not defined by being someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's grandmother. At 80, I'm learning to be just Connie, to figure out what that means without the framework of a marriage that turned out to be a mirage. If I could go back and tell that 20-year-old girl at the community picnic anything, I don't know what it would be. Don't dance with Harold feels too simple, because then I wouldn't have David and Michelle. Pay attention feels cruel, because I did pay attention. I just didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe I'd just tell her to make sure she knows herself completely before she commits to sharing her life with someone else. To be so secure in her own identity that no one else's lies can shake her foundation. But I can't go back, and maybe that's the final lesson here. We can't change the past. We can only decide what we do with the present. Harold made his choices: to lie, to hide, to split himself in half and give pieces to two different women. Those were his choices, and he took them to his grave. My choice is how I live with what he did, and I choose to live honestly, openly, with hard-won wisdom about trust and love and the importance of knowing your own worth. I choose to help others who are walking this painful path to be proof that you can survive the destruction of everything you thought was true and build something new from the rubble. Last week, I ran into Margaret, my old friend who used to say Harold and I were like a storybook. She's heard the whole story by now. Everyone in town has. She started to say something sympathetic, but I stopped her. It wasn't a storybook, I told her. It was a story, all right, but not the one I thought I was living. Now I'm writing a different ending. Harold left behind 2 families, 2 sets of children who carry his genes, 2 women who loved him. But in the end, he belonged to neither of us. He belonged to his secrets, to his lies, to his inability to choose a life and live it fully. As for me, I belong to myself now. It took 80 years and the destruction of everything I thought I knew, but I finally understand that I don't need to be anyone's wife to be whole. I am Constance Marshall, and I survived 50 years of betrayal I didn't know I was enduring. I survived discovering the truth. I survived the grief and the anger and the terrible work of rebuilding. And if I can survive that, I can survive anything. That's the story I tell now when people ask how I'm doing. Not that I was married for 50 years, but that I spent 50 years loving honestly, even if that love wasn't returned in kind. That I raised good children who are better people than their father was. That I'm still here, still standing, still finding reasons to get up in the morning and paint pictures and travel to new places and help others who are stumbling through the wreckage of their own shattered certainties. Harold's final gift to me, though he never meant it as such, was the truth. Even if it came too late, even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew, at least I know now. And I'd rather live in painful truth than comfortable lies. That's all any of us can do, really. Live in the truth we have, whatever that truth may be, and build something honest from it, even at 80, especially at 80.